Running the gauntlet refers to one of the worst forms of corporal punishment. It meant that the convicted man was forced to run between two rows of soldiers, often comrades, who strike out and attack the victim with sticks, spears, and other weapons. Today, the expression is still used, but mainly in a figurative sense, when someone is subjected to a series of hostilities or unpleasant situations. The most famous example of this punishment probably is the so-called Spiessgericht, the court of pikes, of the German mercenaries known as Landsknechts. However, the historian Ruth Schmidt-Wiegand notes that a similar punishment was already used in the Roman military, in which the victim was beaten to death or stoned to death by his comrades. The Landsknechts Court of Pikes, which had its heyday in the 16th century, was a form of collective jurisdiction because the entire Landsknechts community judged the offender together. Accordingly, whenever a new Landsknechts regiment was recruited, both the employer and the Landsknechts themselves had to agree to allow this form of jurisdiction. The Court of Pikes was convened only in cases of particularly serious offences that violated regimental regulations or stained the honour of the regiment. Once a Court of Pikes was convened, there was no turning back. It had to be concluded on the same day, and there were only two possible outcomes: acquittal or death. The death sentence was carried out in the so-called Spießgasse, the alley of pikes. Unlike, for example, death by hanging, having to run the gauntlet was considered honorable. Thanks to the German military writer Leonhard Fronsberger, we know exactly how a court of pikes proceeded. He describes it in detail in his Kriegsbuch of 1573. First, the so-called Provost, who was responsible for prosecution and execution in the regiment, acted as a public prosecutor. With the consent of the commander and the community, he began the trial and requested the death penalty 3 times. The accused man, in turn, asked for mercy 3 times. Then the ensign rolled up the flags of the regiment that had fallen in dishonor and stuck them upside down in the ground. One of the ensigns called for a verdict. The congregation then elected 3 groups of 41 Landsknechts each, who then independently made a recommendation for judgment. Based on these 3 recommendations, the entire community decided the fate of the accused in a vote. If he was found guilty, the Landsknechts immediately proceeded to the place of execution and formed an alley aligned east-west, closed at one end by the ensigns. The condemned man asked for his comrades to pardon him for his crimes, while the entire regiment also asked him to pardon them. Before the execution of the sentence, the respective petitions were granted in a symbolic ritual. Finally, the Provost gave the condemned man 3 blows on the right shoulder and, in the name of the Holy Trinity, told him to run swiftly into the pikes. Thereupon, the convict steps into the alley of pikes, and his comrades each give him a thrust with their spear. If one of the Landsknechts stepped aside and made a gap to let the accused escape, he had to take his place. When the condemned man collapsed, the Landsknechts knelt and prayed for the dead man's soul. Then they regrouped and marched around the body 3 times, while the riflemen fired 3 volleys in the name of the Holy Trinity. At the end of the ceremony, the Provost called the Landsknechts together, thanking them for the fair trial, and warned them to avoid similar offences. The historian Hans-Michael Möller particularly emphasizes the symbolic and ritualistic nature of the Court of Pikes. Quote, "The law of long pikes can probably be most accurately described as a cooperative ritual act with purifying character." Running the gauntlet was soon used outside the Landsknechts armies as a disciplinary punishment. However, much handier weapons were used. Ropes were the weapon of choice in various navies, stirrups in the Prussian cavalry, and sticks among Native Americans. In these cases, the offender was forced to walk slowly through the alley with his hands tied, while each of his comrades gave him a blow on the bare back. Depending on the sentence, the convict had to walk through the alley several times. If he fell and could go no further, the punished person was either laid on straw to receive the remaining blows or allowed to rest until the next day, when he would face the continuation of the torture. This punishment also often resulted in death.